My administration is coordinating directly with communities with largest outbreaks, and we have issued guidance on school closures, social distancing, and reducing large gatherings. Smart action today will prevent the spread of the virus tomorrow.
I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press, and this is Ground Game. As we get started here on Friday, I should note this is a special social distancing edition of Ground Game. Your whole Ground Game crew is right now working from home due to coronavirus concerns. But fortunately, the marvels of modern technology mean we can still bring you today's podcast. And that's good because there's still plenty to talk about. Here are today's three big questions. First,
well, we didn't shake hands today, and we looked at each other and we said, what are we going to do? You know, it's sort of a weird feeling.
How close is coronavirus getting to President Donald Trump? And will he get tested? Second,
downplaying it, being overly dismissive, or spreading misinformation is only going to hurt us and further advantage the spread of the disease.
How are the Democratic candidates trying to leverage this moment? And third,
Donald Trump must be defeated, and I will do everything in my power to make that happen.
How will the anxiety of Americans in this moment affect the presidential campaign? So there's been a lot of talk about all of the people around President Trump who seem to have either tested positive for coronavirus or have been in contact with someone who has. And we've seen over the last couple of days a real move by all of those folks to self-quarantine. We saw Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, several other Republican members of the House who are saying that they have decided to stay home for 14 days, not interact with people because they were in touch with somebody, physically in touch in some cases, who's tested positive with coronavirus. But that's not happening with President Donald Trump. We do know that he was in direct contact with the spokesman for the Brazilian president, Bolsonaro. That spokesman has tested positive for coronavirus. We're waiting to hear about Bolsonaro himself, whether he's tested positive for coronavirus. And yet, President Donald Trump insists that he is not taking any preventative measures to try to see if he has the virus or to try to avoid the spread of it. And it's really striking to see this happen. This is the president of the United States, and he's in a position to try to have to advise Americans on how to prevent the spread of this virus. This is something we've seen happen with President Trump in other situations, not quite this serious, but where there are concerns about his own health, where there are concerns about contacts he may have had with other people. And frankly, he sometimes sees those questions as a sign of weakness about himself, not wanting to acknowledge that he could be potentially at risk, that he may have to take steps to protect his health. I think the pressure is going to mount on the White House, certainly in the next couple of days, for the president to acknowledge that he may be taking some steps to ensure that he's not sick. And for all Americans, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, the health of the president is something that should be serious, that you should be concerned about, and you should want the president to be in good health. So again, it'll be fascinating in the next couple of days to see how the president and his advisors handle this question of a very contagious and in some cases deadly virus that is certainly moving closer to the Oval Office. Of course, the coronavirus outbreak is happening against the backdrop of a presidential campaign. And we've talked this week about how the Democrats are logistically trying to handle this in terms of canceling events and moving to virtual town halls. But there's also a question, our second question of the day.
Because whether or not you're affected or know someone who is infected or have been in contact with an infected person, this is going to require a national response, not just from our elected leaders or our public health officials, but from all of us.
How the Democrats are trying to leverage this moment. They clearly see the president as a leader who is ineffective right now. How are they trying to position themselves as a leader who would do better in this circumstance? Both of the Democratic candidates who are left in the race, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, held speeches on Thursday to outline their own case, to outline how they would handle the situation if they were in the Oval Office right now. Joe Biden is somebody who has some direct experience in this. When he was vice president for Barack Obama, he was there during the H1N1 outbreak. He was there during the Ebola scare in the United States, and he leaned into some of that experience. He also offered to have President Trump take up his own plan that he was putting forward, which focused in part on increasing testing for coronavirus, which is something we're hearing from Democrats a lot. They're really pushing the administration to expand the availability of testing. For Bernie Sanders, this was a moment to tout his Medicare for All proposal. He really tried to emphasize the notion that it is not just a lack of availability of testing, it's broader issues with our healthcare system in general that are making this response from the US government seem so ineffective in some ways and so slow to react. So for Sanders, this was an opportunity for him to really link up this current crisis with the policy that's been at the center of his campaign. I do think that one of the challenges for a candidate like Bernie Sanders is that he's running from behind right now. And when you're running from behind, you do need to find a way to change momentum. You do need to find a way to shift the dynamics in the race. And this is going to be difficult for him when just the oxygen is all getting consumed by coronavirus. It is really going to be hard for Bernie Sanders to do something, to say something that is going to capture the public's attention in a way that allows him to have people give this a second look, to have people think, I wonder if Bernie Sanders is the right man for this moment. For Joe Biden, this all seems to be working in his favor. You know, he has campaigned as the experienced politician, the person who can take this job on day one. And that was also the message that you saw from Joe Biden as he addressed the nation on Thursday. The third big question that I'm thinking about right now is how will all of the anxiety from Americans in this moment affect the campaign?
To reduce the number of people in contagious environment, no gathering with 500 people or more.
The best possible comparison I can think of right now is from my first presidential campaign that I covered, the 2008 campaign. At the very end of that campaign, we were living through the real start of the financial crisis. You had banks that were closing down. You had Americans that were losing their homes. You had Congress that was trying to pass big financial packages to try to keep the economy afloat. And you saw two presidential candidates at that time, Barack Obama and John McCain, try to reassure Americans, try to make them feel like their leadership would allow this financial crisis to ease. And in the end, it was Barack Obama that Americans really saw as best prepared for that situation. They saw him as somebody who was steady. They saw him as someone who came from a different political party than the government that had really led the nation into the financial crisis. And it was in those closing weeks of the campaign, as Americans were just so anxious about the way forward, that a lot of Obama advisors believe that he sealed the deal. We're in a different situation right now because we're still several months away from the campaign. And it's really hard to know exactly where we're going to be come November of 2020. But the anxiety seems the same to me. You do get the sense that people are going to remember this moment, even if we have really moved past coronavirus by the time they get to the ballot box. And so the question is how that anxiety impacts how they vote. Do they look to this moment and look to President Trump's leadership and say, we want to stick with this. His leadership got us through. He is the right man for this moment, and we don't want to make a change. Or is this a moment when they really question his ability to lead the country through these types of unexpected crises, these types of unexpected outbreaks? We have long talked about President Trump being able to avoid for much of his presidency some type of real crisis. There hasn't been a major foreign policy crisis. He has been able to handle natural disasters, but this seems like it's going to be, if not the biggest test of his presidency, certainly one of the biggest tests of his presidency. And he's going to have to convince Americans that he's the right man for the job. Otherwise, there are two Democrats at this point who are ready to try to make that case to Americans themselves. That's it for this episode of Ground Game. Now that 2020 voting has begun, we'll be here every step of the way, giving you all the news you need to know, 5 days a week. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. This episode of Ground Game was recorded on Friday morning. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of your news, head over to apnews.com.
From the Westwood One Podcast Network.